Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to a very special episode of the show with a very special guest alongside my colleague from In the Prog Seat and for Fusion Friday, Eric Porter. Welcome, bassist, composer, legend, Mark Egan is in the house. Mark, how are you?
Good, thank you. Good to see you guys. Thank you.
Same here. Same here. So we were kind of chit-chatting before we started recording. Mark and I were actually Orange County residents. I still am an Orange County resident, but Mark was a longtime Orange County resident, and I actually ran into Mark a number of years ago at a little music festival in the town where he used to live. So we were kind of getting caught up and whatnot. And I also have another story about seeing Mark in concert in the late 80s, but we'll circle back to that in a bit. Well, the reason why we're talking to Mark today, other than the fact that he's a legend, we want to talk to him anyway. Mark's got a brand new album out called Cross Current, which has just come out recently, and it's a trio album, all instrumental music. Mark, what would you say? Bluesy, jazzy, fusiony, funky, a little bit of everything, right? Pretty much.
Yes, I would say all those things. I would call it, I don't know, funky jazz, but it's rocky, and it just has a lot of elements of everything that I've ever played in a way. And then coupled with, my constant way of playing fretless bass and trying to play melodically, but also my enjoyment of playing the groove, which I've done so much. But this is a different record for me. I think it steps out a little more than other records from a conceptual point of view, because it's a guitar trio, bass, drums, guitar. And I've done other trio records. I did a trio record with Danny Gottlieb and John Abercrombie. Very different, though, just sonically different, orchestrationally different, because that was just guitar, bass, and drums. We didn't really overdub anything. This we did, after we did the trio tracks, we layered it with different things to enhance the different songs.
Yeah. Eric, I'll turn it over to you. I know you got some stuff you want to ask Mark specifically.
Yeah, Mark, I was really impressed with this. I mean, I love the record. I got a really, there's just a real openness to it and a space, there's a lot of space in it. And I know, I think I read, kind of rootsy, but maybe an Americana vibe that kind of runs through this. But what I really liked about it was, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing his name wrong. Is it Terrio, the way it's pronounced for Shane, his last name?
The guitar player, Shane Terrio.
Terrio. So obviously I've seen him on Daryl's House, and being that they play with a number of different musicians, he's obviously, he could do just about anything. But what I really liked is the way you and him kind of go back and forth throughout the whole album. There's a lot of interplay. You take a lot of the melodies, and then Shane will take a lot of the melodies. And the texture that really stood out to me on this record is there's a lot of acoustic guitar, and I really enjoyed that. But your back and forth with him is terrific. There's just so much interplay on this record, and it's very open. And I don't want to say loose, because there's a lot going on, and it's intricate, but there's a lot of space in there. And I think I read in the media release that obviously you wanted to record with both Shane and Sean. That was your plan. And so as you were writing this, you had them in mind, and that's pretty much how this came out. Is that correct? That you were writing this knowing these were the guys you were working with down the road, or, whatever it was, a year down the road when you guys got together?
That's exactly correct. We had played together as a trio with a great poet by the name of Frank Messina, who, by the way, I'm playing with this Friday in New York City with Sean Pelton, who's going to be the drummer. And that's a very interesting, we always play usually on Frank Messina's birthday, and this is a birthday celebration at the Cutting Room in New York. And it's with a big band, a lot of different people. They're going to be playing, and one of the times we did it right before COVID, Shane was in the band as well as Sean and I. And there was one point in that performance where we were just playing as a trio, and a light bulb went off in my head. It was because it was so happening. I said, I really want to do a project with this trio. So I remembered that, and then of course, COVID came and the lockdown, and towards the end of it, during lockdown, actually, I did a duo record with Danny Gottlieb called Electric Blue, which is just bass and drums, which is, you know, different from this. There's a lot of space in that record. But again, that's exploring sort of the legacy of Danny and my playing over the years, for 50 years playing together as a, you know, as a drum and bass player. But so I kept that in mind. And after I had released that record with Danny, I wanted to start a new project, and I wanted to do a trio with that, specifically with Shane and Sean. And I started to write with them in mind. I contacted both of them, and they're both busy people, you know, as you know, from Shane playing with Daryl Hall and Sean playing Saturday Night Live and all the different people that he records with in New York. But we came up with some dates, and we had to shift them more. But in the meantime of all of that, I had asked Shane to send me any songs that he had, and Sean also. So Shane sent me a few things, and we worked together on one of the songs called Big Sky. And then we just fed off of each other. And I was writing while I was down in Florida at my studio, which is right behind me here. And I was writing with that in mind, specifically for those guys. And as you mentioned, there is a lot of space in the record, but there's also a, you know, sort of a driving trio that at times where it's really intense grooves, you know, it's really, there's some of the best players in the world. And I was so lucky, you know, Shane is such a great guitarist. He's so fluid and is stylistically can play in many different styles. He comes from New Orleans, but since then he's gone on to play with so many great people. He's done his own records, which are great, which I also listened to when I was trying to come up with ideas for my own compositions for this. So it was sort of a cross-pollination, so to speak, of trying to come up with songs. And I had time. I spent about 9 months, you know, before we actually went in the studio in July of 23 to do this. And finally, when I came up with the 11 songs that we were going to record, I put together demos here at my studio where I had some drum loops, and I put my bass parts down, of course. And I played actually a little bit of guitar, but I left a lot of it open. The melodies I played on, actually Shane played on a lot of my guitars that I had at the time for the session. I have a Heritage, it's like a 335 Gibson. And then I had a Martin D28 that are on the record that he liked. So I had him set up by this great luthier named Bobby Piper, who's in Connecticut. He did a great job setting up those instruments. But so, you know, it was very much a group thing with those guys in mind, having known what they can do. And then I started to branch off and listen to other types of music within that realm that I was looking at to try to get ideas. And a lot of the time, you know, for me, the compositional process is, first of all, to find out, and it's pretty logical, but to find out what the direction of the song is going to be, whether that's going to be based on a bass line or a drum groove. If it's based on a bass line, then I need to come up with a drum groove. If it started with a bass line from a loop or something, or a pattern that I like, then I try to come up with a bass line that fits within that. And so those were some of the ideas that I had for it. And one thing that I have been doing for quite a while, but ever since, especially during the lockdown of COVID, I use just a voice memo that's in my iPhone. So a lot of times, first thing in the morning after I've had my coffee and I'm somewhat awake, I just like to improvise and play, just whatever's in my head the first thing in the morning before I get distracted from life and other things. And a lot of times within those sessions, I'll come up with a little bass line, a little snippet of something, and I'll record it. I'll write down, not write down, I'll speak, you know, this is the tempo of this is 116 BPM. It's in the key of E. It's sort of a funk groove. I hear this type of beat on it. I just try to say as much as I can about what I was thinking about at the moment that I came up with that little idea. Because usually if I don't, I'll forget what I did. And what did I do that day? You know, so I have about 600 or 700 of these little snippets. So when it was time to work on this record, I went back and I filtered through a lot of things, and I filtered through things that I thought fit the concept of what we were going with, this spacious, rootsy, rocky, R&B, funky, jazzy concept that I was thinking of. And I pulled those things, those ideas, and if they held up during that process of going over it and sort of playing it and come up with things, then the way that I write is it's an additive thing. I have that line, okay, let me modulate that down a whole step, and okay, now let me take it to a B section, and let me think about what would be a good B section. And sometimes I would merge it with another idea that I had that was similar in the tempo of it. So that it's sort of, a little Frankenstein-y, Dr. Frankenstein. But that's the way I do it. And it's interesting because I watched, not that I identify myself with Woody Allen, but I was watching a documentary about Woody Allen. He was there interviewing him, or he was talking about how he comes up with his movies. And he, during the year, this is what he said in this movie, he has a bag, like a paper bag. Comes up with these little ideas. He writes them and he puts them in this bag. And when it's coming time to do a movie, he rents a hotel room and he brings the bag and he puts these pieces all over, these little ideas, and he strings things together. And I'm sure he has a lot more of an overall view of what he wants. But it was interesting because I related to that, where you just, if you can just savor these little ideas that you have and sort of piece them together to become things. Not many of the songs on the record were just, I sat down one day, just composed everything, and it was the process. And Shane came up with some really smoking groove, R&B, and I had to figure out a way that I could make it a Mark Egan record in terms of having it be my sound on top of it with fretless melodies. So I would suggest, let me play the melody on fretless bass and I'll double that. And then the next time around on the bridge, you play it, and then we'll play it together, which is part of orchestrating and arranging it. So
I find it amazing.
A lot of work went into it, a tremendous amount of work, I think. And I was just talking to a friend of mine today. It felt like this record was the most in-depth preparation of anyone that I've ever done. But maybe it's because I'm getting older and it's more acute. You're just remembering everything, or time is going by so fast or something that it seems that way. But a lot of work went into it, nevertheless. And many people have said, and including the person who makes my basses, Mike Padula, said, because I always send him my new releases, and he said, I listened to it once and I wasn't sure. He said it was great and everything, but it was different for you, because he had just heard the duo record with Danny Gottlieb and I, drums and bass, which is the other side of this record. It's another zone. So it was interesting, but he said he listened to it the next day and the next day and the next day, and he really got it, whatever that meant for him.
Eric told me the exact same thing, Mark. He said that I liked it the first time I heard it, but then I listened to it again and again, and it just kept growing on me and growing on me. And it's almost the exact words you just said.
Well, that's great to hear. I know a lot of it is, there are many layers within of these songs, the way that it was orchestrated with, as you said, Eric, with acoustic guitars, and Shane did some beautiful swells in the background. There's many layers, and it's something that over the years, mixing and just producing records, that I've always liked to have these sort of textures that wave in and out of things. Around solos to sort of, this record really sounds great with headphones, if I do say so myself, because you get to hear that the physical three-dimensionalness of what's happening. We did a lot of, there's a plugin called auto panning, which, takes things from left to right, right to left, and you can control the speed and how far left or how far right something goes. But a lot of these background volume swells, we did that. So if you listen to it, they're moving around, but it gives it a three-dimensional type of orientation to it, which I like. It's something that I've learned from just so many different productions, from playing with the Pat Metheny Group and working with Manfred Eicher, with the great ECM producer. His concept of the depth of reverbs and the use of, EQ and reverbs and delays to get those type of things. So we consciously really worked on that. That was something we spent a lot of time on.
So you mentioned Danny Gottlieb before, who you did the album with not that long ago. I mean, you guys have known each other forever. Both of you were in the inaugural Pat Metheny Group, but you guys had the band Elements for a long, long time. And the story I hinted at that I wanted to kind of circle back when we were talking earlier. So I got to see you guys in Long Island in the late 80s in Huntington. I don't remember the name of the theater. It was a lot of jazz and fusion bands played there all the time. I don't remember the name of the place, but I had just started listening to Elements, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was the Illumination tour, I think, but I'm not 100%
Yes.
on that. And I remember you had,
Steve Kahn was playing guitar.
was it Steve Kahn? I couldn't remember who the guitar player was. That's probably because I know
Yes.
Stan Smoley played on the album, I believe.
As well as Steve Kahn, two guitars.
Yeah. That was a terrific show. Terrific show. In fact, I think that
I
was one of the
still
first.
have vivid memories of that show.
You do or I do? I don't. I wish I had better memories, but what do you remember? What the name of the place was in Huntington?
It was something Center for the Arts or Huntington Center for it was right in the downtown. It had
Right
a
in downtown.
marquee,
Yes. Yep. Exactly. And I had
something
seen
like
Mike Stern there within a couple of months, either before or after you guys. It was like my last year living in Long Island before I moved back upstate. And I was just going to catch all these great jazz and fusion acts all over the place in Long Island and New York City. Yeah, what's Huntington Center for the Arts? That might have been what it was called, something like that. But anyway, great venue. It was such a great concert. And then, like I said, about 10 years later, I ran into you in Warwick, New York at a little outdoor jazz fest, crazy as it seems. But
yes, yeah.
So is Elements basically done at this point? I mean, I know it's been a while since you guys did anything. A very cool band. I always really enjoyed your music.
Yeah, well, Danny and I are continuing to do projects. Actually, there's another, there's many hours of recording that are similar to what we did on the duo record of Electric Blue. And that's one project that's going to be coming out, it'll probably be called Mark and Danny. But it really is Elements, and we may orchestrate it with some of the original players on that. But we talk about it, and Elements is not over. We're
Good to hear.
As long as Danny and I are still alive, we'll be doing something with Elements.
That's great. That's great. So, a lot of people, you've played with so many people. I mean, I just for those who are listening and watching, I mean, Mark has played with Mike Stern and David Sanborn and special effects, Bill Evans, Gil Evans, Chuck Loeb, Gato Barbieri, Larry Coryell, Marianne Faithfull, Tuck and Patty, Michael Franks, Johnny Winter, and that's only scratching the surface. But most people probably remember you so fondly for those couple of years on the Pat Metheny Group and American Garage. Could you kind of like take us back to those days? I know it was kind of fleeting for you, but what was it like to be in that band that's looked back on right now with such fondness from jazz and fusion fans? I mean, it's really a legendary band when you really think about it.
It was a great band. It was a great period. I had just at the time that Pat asked me to join the band, which was in 1977, I was playing with David Sanborn's band in New York, and we had just done the record Promise Me the Moon. And I had known Pat from the University of Miami. We all studied there, Danny, myself, and Pat. Actually, a lot of people, Hiram Bullock, Clifford Carter, also played there. Went to school there, and we played together there. And I was really starting to be very established in the New York session scene when I was playing with David Sanborn. And when Pat asked me to go on the road, I was reluctant to leave that scene because it's hard to break into New York. It's one of the hardest in the world of any place. But Pat said, well, why don't you come up to Boston and we'll just rehearse and go over some songs and see what you think. So I did. I remember taking the Amtrak with the train from New York to Boston. I had some practice headphones. I practiced the whole way with headphones on, and I don't know what I was practicing. I was just playing just lines, whatever. We played at Danny and Lyle had a house together, and we played, and I said, I got to do this. This is so great, you know. And I remember calling David Sanborn and saying, David, I'm going to be leaving to play with Pat Metheny Group, and he didn't know. He might have known who Pat Metheny was, but Pat wasn't known other than his work with Gary Burton. He was known. He had done Bright Side's Life. He had done Watercolors. He was, of course, known in the jazz world, guitar world, but not on the level, of course, that he is now or was when the Pat Metheny Group really hit it hard. So, you know, I was leaving New York to do that. I was, you know, first call session player doing that. And we'd have roadies with David Sanborn. That compared to going out on the road and in a van playing 300 days a year, lifting our own equipment, you really had to love it. But the music was great. It was a magical combination. Not only everyone's playing as far as the way that we fit together and we're sympathetic with each other, but also the combination of Pat's direction and his ultimate leadership of it, along with Lyle's masterful genius arranging and composing. And that was just a very strong combination. And we were young. We were 25 years old and not really attached. You know, we didn't have families or weren't married. We were all single and, you know, ready to hit it hard. And that's all we did. We went on the road. We rehearsed one time and then we played New York City. I think that was the first gig. And then we never stopped, you know, and we'd introduce songs on the road and learn them. And, you know, it was interesting. I was seeing some videos of us playing and we were never reading music on stage. And when I go to see, there was one from Germany. I think we played at Uncle Po. It was a pretty popular video. And I was just listening to the arrangements of Airstream and how do we remember all that? There's a lot going on, but it was very exciting, and to watch it take off was very exciting. You know, we rehearsed at one time, then we were on the road basically, like I said, 300 days a year. And then after the first year, we went into the studio in Oslo, Norway, to record the first record, which is just called the Pat Metheny Group. It's a white album with our names on it. And that album really got some traction. And I remember calling back home to my girlfriend at the time, and she said it's on the radio everywhere in New York. And it was happening and catching on all over. So it was sort of the shot that was heard around the world. And, you know, we were extremely conscientious about being a group and developing a group sound. And, you know, every night we'd have band meetings and Pat would, you know, make suggestions, Lyle, Danny, and myself, we could do this better, let's do this. And, you know, some of the specific things we would work on were, and it's some of the things that people don't spend a lot of time on, and those are dynamics, you know, the dynamics of a band, loud and soft. And, you know, when you go to see a band play and right from the downbeat, when they hit it, it's just as loud as it is at the end. And there's so much that you can do compositionally through dynamics that makes something dynamic, not to use the same word. So there was, you know, when you listen to those records, we go from, you know, triple F, very loud, down to the soft. And then, you know, and it draws the audience in, but it also leaves room for the music to breathe. And it's natural. It's almost the way that we speak or we talk with friends. You know, our language, we're up and down. We have expressions and emphasis on different things. So it was a very exciting time. And we went from being in a van together, loading our own equipment, to after the first year, I think we had someone who drove the van, but we were in the van with them. we all loaded the equipment, to then finally we flew, the person driving the van loaded it, and it was an assistant, and they would load it, and on. And then it came to semi trucks taking a grand piano and all our equipment and a sound system, and I think possibly lighting. I'm not sure about that, but we brought a lot of gear. And but it was all for the love and to make the music sound good, because you go in different theaters and you have a different sound person every day, and you're at the mercy of whatever's there, and sometimes it's great and sometimes it can be very challenging. And it's hard enough being on the road. We would do 21 straight one-nighters, all over the United States, a different city every day, flying everywhere. And you just the best part of that was being on stage. The rest is just sort of a blur, and dealing with traveling. And it wasn't like traveling now. Traveling now to me is a big hassle. Ever since we had 9/11 and TSA, there was none of that. You went through a screen, but it's just the whole experience now it's gone crazy. People getting sucker punched, and I don't have to get into it. You all know what you read about it or hear about it, what's going on with traveling and airlines. But we were lucky for the time period that we did it, because it was affordable to go on the road and do what we did. And there were many, many clubs and many venues available to play. And we had a very good booking agency, Ted Kurland Associates, and he also had booked Gary Burton before that, and that's how Pat hooked up with him. He booked Keith Jarrett, Chick Corea, a lot of great people. And one thing I think that was really key in a lot of the venues that we were playing in were these colleges. Different colleges have budgets to have groups come in, and it was a great way of spreading the word very fast when you play at a college, because there's so many people and people are listening. And also you have to remember, this is 1977, so there was no social media at all. So it was, sort of word of mouth in so many ways, right? It was basically word of mouth or reading, maybe. What else? On the radio?
Yeah, newspaper reviews, radio mentions on radio, maybe a magazine article. That's it, right?
Yep. And every town we would play in, or city, we'd if there was a reviewer there, we'd go to get the newspaper before we were leaving in the van or whatever the next morning, and read the review, and and then go on to the next. So it was a different world. And we did our own version of networking in that way, but we had a good, really good booking agent that got us to a lot of places. And then once airplay started taking off and the band started taking off, it really circulated all over the world. We traveled, we did, I don't know how many tours of Europe, but I've played in every country, just about everywhere. I haven't played in Africa. I've played in China, all over Europe, everywhere in Europe, South America, New Zealand, Bali, Australia, everywhere. So it was a great experience. And, I think those records, the two records that I was on, American Garage and the first record, still have a beauty to them. When I listen to them, they have a real special sound, and when people who know of me or know of me as related to that, really still are akin to that, and they like it and talk about how it influenced them, or how for some people, it was their first introduction to jazz, which, it's kind of from the back door, because we were influenced by real jazz people, and we were sort of bringing in our own flavor of improvisation into it. But
it's kind of like heartland jazz, almost, sort of, right? I guess I always have a hard time really describing the music of the original Pat Metheny Group, or Pat Metheny's music in general, because it is jazz, but it's not like anybody else's jazz, right? It's very unique.
Yes. I think the jazz part of it was that everyone had the language, or were developing the language of improvisation, and Pat's a masterful improviser, and Lyle, and all of us had been studying it and we're into it. And I think that is a big part of jazz, is the way that people communicate through their instruments. And that's something for me, when I got introduced to jazz, really the depth of jazz, when I went to the University of Miami and I studied with a great teacher named Jerry Coker, another teacher named Whit Seidner. And that's when I realized how deep jazz was, and how that's what I really wanted to study, because of the depth of the communication in the language of jazz that was happening. And the first record that really made me aware of that was when I was listening to the John Coltrane record, A Love Supreme. I was listening with headphones, and my jaw dropped, and I said, these people are communicating on an extremely high level in this music language. And I got it. It just clicked for me then. And then that time I was listening to everybody from Miles Davis and everyone that played with Miles Davis. And of course, all the great bassists, acoustic and electric. It made me aware of studying the lineage of where this all came from. And it's something that I'm still studying, and I still go back and forth and back to it, because it's so deep. And there's people that have taken it to such a deep level, like Miles Davis and like John Coltrane and Keith Jarrett and Bill Evans, a piano player, and all the great drummers. So it was when I got introduced to those people that it really opened me up to jazz. And I think it's the same thing for Pat Metheny. He went back to roots, to Wes Montgomery and to the early jazz guitarists. And so all of that came into the Pat Metheny Group and was part of that language. But as you said, it's like the heartland, because Pat loved Wichita linemen. You know, he loved Glenn Campbell, and I come from, my early roots are Hendrix and Cream, and listening to Ravi Shankar. And I remember, you know, also another big thing about my upbringing, in the 60s, I was listening to a radio station. I'm from Boston, Brockton, Mass, outside of Boston. I was listening to a radio station, WBCN. And at the time, and what FM radio was then, it wasn't all formatted the way it is now. Now you have, you know, jam band, jazz, smooth jazz, real jazz, hard jazz, rock, progressive rock, progressive jazz. It was just music. And I remember I'd be up in my bedroom listening to Jimi Hendrix. And then all of a sudden I would hear Ravi Shankar come on. And then I would hear, excuse me 1 minute. Hold on. Oh, hold on. Hold on 1 second, guys.
Mark, do you ever have any regrets of that band not lasting longer than they did?
No, I don't. It was an evolution. You know, it was time for a change for me and Pat. He wanted to do different things with acoustic bass. And I had, even though I was on the road all the time with Pat, when we would have time off, I was always in New York recording. I would call, there used to be a service called Radio Registry, which is a service that was a central sort of answering center. And producers would call Radio Registry and they'd say, I want to have, you know, this person and this person, Mark Egan, play on this record, such and such a date. And I never told them that I was away or I wasn't there. I just said I'm not available, like I was busy, you know. So, but then I did take a lot of dates. So when I would come back to New York, I was in the studio all the time. So I wanted to get back into that and do different things. And Danny and I wanted to do our group Elements, and I wanted to do some different music. So it was time to move on for me. It sort of went full circle for me.
Gotcha. Did you ever get to meet Jaco?
Did I ever meet Jaco? Oh, I met Jaco. We were both in Florida at the time. I was at the university.
Yeah.
And Jaco lived in Fort Lauderdale, and we both played in different bands, but with the same leader named Ira Sullivan, who has since passed away, but was an incredible jazz musician. multi-instrumentalist. And at the time I was playing acoustic bass as well as electric. And Ira was playing with another band up in Lauderdale with Jaco. And I remember him telling me, you got to hear this bass player Jaco, you know, and he would bring some of Jaco's songs to play with this acoustic group. I played with him. And so finally I got to meet Jaco, and I was blown away, like everyone who probably first heard him play, because he was a legend. He changed the bass. You know, he was a major innovator. So I did meet him. We actually played in the same band together called Baker's Dozen, which was a big band that was Ira Sullivan and a lot of the studio players that lived in Miami. And that's where Jaco played in that on some of his songs. And then I played some other songs, but we played together. And then I took some lessons one summer. Jaco was adjunct faculty at the university. He never really, while I was there, taught full time, but he later, I think, did a lot more teaching there.
It's amazing how many of you were down there in Florida. I mean, it's I had Steve Morse on the channel a couple of years ago, and he mentioned playing with Pat and with Jaco. Did you ever get to play with Steve Morse at all?
I did get to play with Steve. There were a lot of, you know, they had small groups and different situations, and I'm sure I did play with Steve. I don't remember specifically, but I know we must have jammed. And but as I mentioned, Clifford Carter and Hiram Bullock were there.
Yep.
Stan Samoli, which is a great guitar player, was there. He's on our Elements record.
Yep.
And so, you know, there were so many opportunities in Florida and Miami. There were so many clubs, gigs everywhere, a lot of players, and it was a real melting pot because Florida is the Caribbean. So you have, it's tropics. And so you had a lot of Afro-Cuban music, you have music from Puerto Rico, music from the Bahamas, and couple that with all the jazz. There was a really nice jazz scene. And Miami was, you know, it's separate from the rest of the country, just being a peninsula. So it was a little bubble down there, but it was a good bubble because it was a healthy competition, but it wasn't as possibly oppressive or intense as being a young player in New York City, because there's a lot of players in New York, and there's a lot of great players in New York. And it was a great opportunity. There was, you know, in Miami at the time, on Miami Beach, there were hotels, the Fontainebleau, the Carillon, the Newport, all these hotels, and they had national acts that would come in and do 1 or 2 week engagements, and they would need a backup band. They'd just come, maybe a pianist. So a lot of the people in the jazz band at the university would be the backup band for all these people. So I was working 6 or 7 nights a week playing these different bands, and every week it would be a different person, and it would be people like Frankie Avalon, Bobby Vinton, Robert Goulet. You know, a lot of people might know those names, but these are a lot of the national acts that were happening during that time period. And so it was a great opportunity because it really sharpened up my reading skills, having to read a book of a show, and you only have a rehearsal in the afternoon of the night you're going to be playing. So you had to get it together really fast, you know? So it was a great experience, and it's hard to find. I don't think you can find that type of vocational work. Now it's, you know, in New York, it would be Broadway, and there are theater shows and things, but not to the level of the intensity that was down in the Miami area. And then speaking of Jaco, I moved up to New York in 1976, and around that time, I don't remember the exact date, but Jaco did his first solo record, and then he joined Weather Report. And we later went on with the Pat Metheny Group to open up for Weather Report with Jaco playing. You know, so that was really a full circle for me. An honor, of course, you know, doing that. And we played, I remember we played the Berkeley Theater in Berkeley, California, outdoor amphitheater, opening up for Weather Report. And that's a lot of pressure for a bass player, you know, I got to say. But we were very confident as the Pat Metheny Group, and it was so tight knit that, it was just a very powerful band, Pat Metheny. And then later on, when Jaco moved to New York, we played together with the Gil Evans Orchestra. So he would come and sit in. We played every Monday night at Sweet Basil, which is a club in New York City. And we did some tours with that band. We went to Japan. There's some videos of that, actually. I don't know if you've seen them, but with Gil Evans, with Jaco. And we played a tour there, a couple of tours, actually. And we played a lot at that place called Sweet Basil, the club. So I had a lot of contact with Jaco, and I have a lot of influence from him. A lot of it would be probably conceptually more than the sound, because I think my sound is very different than what Jaco's was, and I purposely tried to take it to a different place. But in some ways, if someone picks up a fretless bass and plays a note on it, someone might say, "Oh, that's Jaco," because Jaco really made a signature out of that sound. But there are so many different ways to get your own voice on the instrument, I feel. And it's something that I'm always working on. And I love the fretless bass because it's such an open instrument where there's infinite space between each note, and it's more like an electric cello in a way. And I love the sound of it, but it also can function as a heavy foundation, which I like to do. So
Yeah, I mean there's a similarity about the fretless bass, whether you're Jaco or yourself or Percy Jones or Bunny Burnell, there's a sound to it, but you all bring your own characteristic, I think, to the fretless bass. That's what's so great about it. All four of you guys are so unique. And that's as fans, I mean, that's great to hear.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, Jaco lives. His music is just something. He's just, I've never met anyone that played with that much energy and that had that much of a personality in their music. It's really incredible.
I'm just sitting here thinking, man, Pat Metheny Group and Weather Report all in one night on the same stage. That would have been something to see.
It was great. We also played at Avery Fisher Hall in New York, where Jaco opened up for the Pat Metheny Group, or whatever. He went on first, but he played with Bob Moses, and Don Elias, I think, played with him. And that was an amazing concert.
Wow. Yeah, and as Eric and I were talking when you had to step off for a second, I love Bright Size Life. It's one of my favorite Pat Metheny albums, but I think that the Pat Metheny Group with you and the band was almost like the next extension of that, just with a little more expansive sound. It seemed like the perfect next evolution of what those two guys were doing together on the Bright Side of Life album.
I agree. And we played, when we first got the first Pat Metheny Group together, we played a lot of the music from Bright Size Life. And we played some of the music from Watercolors as well, which was the record before that with Eberhard Faber on it.
Yep.
It was another big influence on me. And but you're right. I think that just the type of, I think Pat had really honed in on that across the heartland sound in Bright Size Life and expanded on it, especially with Lyle. That opened up another universe to Pat's sound, the way that he orchestrated the music.
Yeah, for sure. Eric, I know you got other things you want to ask.
Well, you've been talking about, obviously we're talking about music. You've spent your whole life in music. When did becoming a composer kind of grab you? I mean, obviously you were practicing bass, you went to school for bass. I think you said I had read you started on trumpet before you actually chose the bass as your main instrument. But, a lot of people are guitar players and things, but they never actually write or compose. When did that become an important thing to you outside of just being a bass player or whatever?
I've always been interested in writing songs, and even when I was a trumpet player, I remember I wrote a song it was a duet, a trumpet duet that I played for my, every year you had to play in front of the professors at the end. I forget what it's called, but, and we played that. I wrote a song for that. I also just would sit down at the piano and just write little songs, and just something that I gravitated towards. I don't know how to, I wasn't really trying to copy anything. I had started studying arranging and composition at the university, so I was aware of that. But I also, actually very similar to what I mentioned earlier about, I'd practice, come up with some bass lines, and I would say, oh, I mean, that would be a nice song. Let me do that. And then I would write a melody on top of that. And so those are the early kernels of writing ideas for me. And I would keep a notebook. Early on, when I first started to play bass, I would come up with ideas, because before I played bass, I was a professional trumpet player. I was already playing, shows and playing in funk and R&B bands and the horn sections, and I was playing at school in the wind ensemble and small orchestra at the school. So I think I just kept expanding on that. And as things went on, and I first wanted to do a record, the first record that we did was Elements, the first Elements record. And I had that started from some pieces, small pieces that I had, and I sort of orchestrated those. And then when I did my Mosaic record, that was more elaborate, and that was multi overdub basses, as well as playing with the trio with Mitch Foreman and Manolo Badrina. And, that was inspired, the compositions for that were inspired by the double neck bass that I had, which was a 4-string fretless and 8-string fretted bass. And just by experimenting on it, I was writing songs. So it was just sort of a natural progression for me. And the more that I wrote, the more I realized that I didn't know about writing and wanted to know, and tried to listen more and study composition more. I studied composition with Ron Miller, who's a professor at the University of Miami, and studied out of a lot of his books, and listened to a lot of people and transcribed things. That's, for me, that's been a big building block, is if I really liked a song, try to analyze what I like about it. What is it? What is the essence of that I like, or listening to certain chords? And I go through different phases. There were some phases where I felt like I was sort of writing the same song all the time, in that it was, okay, a bass line, now a melody, and then we'll go here with it. And then I got more into compositional techniques based on different composers like Bartók and Alban Berg, where they used different techniques, 12-tone techniques. So I would incorporate some of those type of things just to experiment with it. So I like to use my imagination and leave myself open to imagination. And that's what writing and composing is all about. It's just imagining some, visualizing something and staying in it and staying with it. And I think one of the biggest things is not getting distracted. Like I said earlier about distraction, and just, getting my phone out of the room and spending time and say, okay, today I'm going to write this A section. But the funny thing is, Eric, that every time I say I'm going to write this, I end up writing something else, and it's okay, but it's not what I started out writing. And it wouldn't have come out that way unless I really took the time and started experimenting. So that's, for my writing, and I have a long way to go. I feel like I'm ready to start a new record now, because I went full circle with Cross Currents, and the present record, which is just actually coming out. Its official release is March 8th, is when the radio starts, a big radio campaign for it. So I'm curious to see how it's received, and I want to start thinking about writing for something else. And I've already gone back and listened to my 600 or 700 little ideas, trying to draw some
those
things.
little ideas that come to you in the morning. I never got a chance to comment on that because I think that's a fascinating little tidbit. You know, how many people do their best little bit of creativity, whatever it is that you do, first thing in the morning when your mind is still kind of fresh and blank, right? Because you're absolutely right. As the day goes on, you're bombarded with all this information and tasks and things that you're doing, and your brain tends to get a little more scrambled. I would think like first thing in the morning, you're up, you're at like slate zero. That's probably the best time to have these little creative bursts come at you. So it's not surprising that that's kind of what you do. To me, as a morning person, it makes total sense.
Yeah, and you know, it's something that from discipline wise, I've tried to do is the first thing after I have breakfast and a couple cups of coffee, I just want to go in the music room and just start playing, just see what's going on in my head, and then go from there. And then, you know, a lot of times people ask me, well, what do you practice? And you know, it really depends on what is going on. If I have a show coming up, or if I have a record I'm working on, or music that I'm preparing, I'll work on that, and out of that will come exercises, because inevitably I'll find that, wait a minute, I can't really play that or articulate that the way that I want to. Why can't I? And I'll do things where I'll isolate my left hand or my right hand, or sometimes if I'm having trouble with a line, it's because my right hand that plays the string is fumbling. So then I say, okay, let me slow this down. I'm only going to play the notes of the right hand of the strings that make up this melody in the left hand, and find out what those open strings are. I'll make a little exercise out of that using just the harmonics, you know, at the 12th fret, I'll fret it and then it'll just make a sound. And then if I know that I have it in the right hand, I say, okay, let me play it again. And it feels better. And then, you know, gradually that's how it comes together for me. And so, you know, it's just all those things start in the morning for me, and later on too. But by the end of the day, I'm pretty spent because there's been so many things, you know, just from life, whatever it is you do. You know, you have to go out and go shopping, or pay bills, or you go to the post office, or you have to go to the bank, or you have to go whatever it is. It's harder later for me. But then sometimes when I'm not in a composing mode and I'm in a practice mode, I'll really get into some specific things, and I'll try to do like a 3-hour session of practicing where I'll practice warm-ups. I'll do scales, 2-octave scales, 2-octave arpeggios. I work a lot with different minor scales, melodic minor, harmonic minor. I don't know if these make any sense to you guys. I don't know. Do you know? Are you musicians? I'm sorry.
I try. I know
Yeah,
Pete
we
does.
both play a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know anything about it, so I don't take anything for granted. But so, and then I'll go back and listen to people and transcribe things, and that's, you know, that's how I go forward, and I just want to keep going forward with it, because there's so much more to do. The more you do, the more you realize there's more to do.
Well, it's inspiring
guys,
with all your time in music that you're still practicing 3 hours a day. I mean, that's impressive.
Yeah.
well, I don't always practice 3 hours, but if I really want to go to a new level, that's the magic number. And I read that the great violinist Jascha Heifetz, that's something that he said, to really go forward, you have to do really concentrated at least 3 hours a day. Now, I don't know what he's talking about as far as what he practiced or anything, but, and I don't compare myself to Jascha Heifetz, but I thought it was a good goal. And I think it makes sense. But the main thing is consistency. It's like with anything, even other than music, it's being consistent, and, you know, doing it every day or whatever, and just keeping track of where you're at and watching what you're doing, being aware of where you are and trying to take it forward and do it better. And for me, I'm very pragmatic in that I'll write down, you know, metronome markings. Okay, I did this at this tempo today. I'm going to do it tomorrow and go up a couple ticks, see how it is, and keep going like that and practice. And that's how you really get good, to me. It doesn't, there's no mystery to it. You have to put in the hours, but it's the concentrated and the thoughtful and the aware hours that you put into it. Because someone could just sit in front of the TV and play whatever. But, you know, the way you have to do it is really pay attention to it.
Yeah.
But it's with anything, whether you're a writer of books or whatever. If you're an architect, you know, I think it goes with anything that people do. You really have to pay attention and be in the moment of it.
I'd agree. So before we let you go, Mark, we always like to get a little gear talk going, right? I see you got two basses behind you. What are you playing these days? What are your favorite instruments that you like to kind of practice around with and play with and record with?
Sure. Well, this right here, this is my fretless 5-string Padula bass, which I've been with Padula since 1981, I think, playing his basses and endorsing them. And they're just great instruments. They're part of my sound. They are my sound. And it's something that he started with. It was first called the Buzz bass, which at that time I was playing 4-string. And I remember the first one I had, I loved it and kept working with it, doing prototypes. Now he since has retired a few years ago. But this is it's a Mark Egan signature bass. And it's a 5-string fretless, 2-octave neck. And I use D'Addario strings, XL 170s, Planet Waves cables that go out of the bass, which is also part of the D'Addario company. And for my bass amps, I use Mark bass amps. I have all different configurations from their heads, the Mark bass 3 head. I have different configurations of the cabinets, 210s, one single 12s. I went modular. A lot of times I play in stereo, so I have stereo effects. I'll use a stereo chorus. And so I'll have two sets, 2 complete combos left and right. And just to save my back and my arms and everything, I went modular. So I have single 12 combos, 2 on each side. I like that sound a lot. That'll fit, you know, pretty much any club. Not big venues, but usually everything has a sound system. And if you have monitors, you don't need more. That's the basic setup that I do for that particular bass. And then when I'm recording, I go into a radial direct box, which is with Jensen transformers. And on this record, Cross Currents, that's exactly what I did. I played through my 2 direct boxes in stereo, and I went into a Neve console. We recorded this at the Power Station, which is a replica of the Power Station in New York. There's one in Connecticut. It's about 20 minutes from my home. It's called Power Station New England. And that's where we recorded the record Cross Currents. And so that's the sound of that. And then I use a lot of effects. I use Earthquaker devices. And one is called, I have it right here. It's called Dispatch Maker. And it's reverb and delay combination. And I love this. I use this all over the record. It's simple, it's stereo, and it's mono in and out. And I can get a nice delay, a nice reverb. And I printed all my bass melodies and solos with that. And a lot of people don't necessarily record and commit their things with an effect. They sometimes do it after the fact with plugins, whatever, but I like to record with the sound that I have because, well, one thing, it inspires me because I've got the sound and I'll play to it. If I have the delays a certain way, I might hold the note a little longer so that the delays happen. And so I use that in an old TC Electronics stereo chorus, which I really like. I also have a lot of effects that I use in different venues and different things when I'm playing with Elements or with Danny. I have some Lexicon digital delays where I use, you know, pedals to do looping things, which I haven't done in a while. I did a lot of that on the Mosaic record, and Danny did it and I did it on the Duo record. This other bass here is a NS bass, the Steinberg 5-string upright bass. And It's just a great instrument. I actually wrote two of the songs on the new record. One is called Pocket Call. The bass line, I just went up and played that bass line on that bass. And then I wrote the song around that bass line. And then another one is called, the title track, Cross Currents, was another one. Another one of those morning little snippet recordings where I had the bass line and I said,
Is
"Let
that
me
the
record it."
opening line, Mark, where it's just you and the drums and then Shane
Yes.
comes in? Is it that? I love
Yeah.
that opening.
Yeah, that was written on that bass line.
It's cool.
And the Pocket Call was also written on that. And Pocket Call, that song is a lot like Sissy Strut, which is a Meters song. If you listen to Sissy Strut, you'll know what I mean when you listen to that, but it's different. But it's a homage to New Orleans. And since Shane, the guitar player, is from New Orleans, I wanted to do something that would be in his neck of the woods there. So I have that. I have a fretted version. Speaking of equipment, gear, I have a fretted version exactly like this fretted bass. It's also green, which I like. And then I have several double neck basses, other prototypes that were made on the way that I use from time to time. I play Marlowe basses. It's a company from Germany and they make beautiful instruments. Marlowe, I have a 5-string fretted and a 5-string fretless from them. They're beautiful instruments. And so that's, a lot of my gear. I have so many effects and pedals and everything. I have a new thing by
Effects are
Simon
buying effects are like an
I like a
addiction.
lot.
Right?
What's that?
I said
Sure.
buying effects pedals are like an addiction. You get started, it's like there's so many out there.
Yeah, do you have
They're
a
all
lot?
a little different. They're just different enough. It's
Which ones do you use?
Oh man, I've got all sorts of stuff. I've got Big Muff and Crybaby wah-wahs, and I got all sorts of delays and phasers, and I got a rat pedal, and I mean, I got a whole train.
Same thing.
Yeah,
Yep. Go
What do you
back
have,
to the
Eric?
MXR days. I've got an MXR phaser. I've got a TC Electronics Vibe. I bought the two guys who they do a guitar show, Dan and
oh, the
somebody.
pedal guys.
The pedal guys. And I bought their
Yeah.
distortion box. That's really cool because there's one side that's very heavy, the other side's more of just like a amp tone. So but like Pete said, I mean, there's so many toys out there. It's easy to get, and then half the time they're just sitting in a box somewhere. But
That's the thing,
Exactly.
right?
I know. I have so many too. And and the nice thing about that Earthquaker, that white pedal, is that it's a delay and reverb and it sounds great. I first heard of this through Vic Juris, the great Vic Juris guitar player, who since passed away. And we were playing trio. We did a record with Carl Latham's record called Standards. I forget the name of the record, but it's a great record. And Vic played on that, and he played that pedal. And I just said, "What is that? That's great." And all it takes is one little thing. So I had to get it. So I got it. And Eventides makes an H9. I think that's what this
Yes.
new pedal is too.
Yeah,
And I played.
H9s are great.
That's amazing.
Mhm.
Wow. So, and a lot of times, as you guys know, just trying to pedal for something, it'll inspire a line or whatever. It makes you want to do something different. It was that way for me with synthesizers. I remember because I embraced synthesizers and I did a lot of writing for elements on synth. And when I would get a new sound, now which are very obsolete, but it would make me write a song about it. So I'm open to buying pedals. There's no end to it. It's endless.
It is endless.
Yeah, there's no end to it. And it's crazy. Like, why, like for me, I mean, I just play at home for fun, but like, why do I need like a tube screamer and a blues driver pedal, right? Why do I need 3 different fuzz pedals? Why do I need a univibe and a chorus and a phase, right? Why do I need all these things? Because it's cool to
Right.
have them in the
Fun,
song,
yeah.
right?
But especially, with guitar, especially, it's nice to have an overdrive and You know,
Okay.
just some reverb, some delays. It's hard for me to play melodies without having some reverb and delays. So
Yeah, for sure.
for the show I mentioned in New York that I'm going to be doing, I'm bringing that white pedal up with me for that. And that's probably all I'm going to bring. I don't probably won't need to bring that much more than that.
Hey, Mark, if I can get one more question in just quick. If you had to give us your favorite track from this record, what would it be? From Cross Currents.
That's a good question for I really like Gulf Stream, which is the second song.
Yep. Great slide in that. I love Shane's slide in that song. I think he's playing acoustic slide, right?
Yes, and I was really pleased with the way that that song came out, and it really went to the place of that rootsy place that I wanted to do, but also had room for us to do solos in it. And even though I do solo in it, but I also like, there's sections of song that I love, like in Homebrew.
That's my favorite right there. That's my favorite. Homebrew. Love it.
Homebrew, and it goes to the B flat section, and it was supposed to be a bass solo, but I just started playing that bass like and there's just something about that. The way that Sean and Shane play on that is incredibly funky and groovy, you know, and so that's one of my favorites. There's something about the last song, Eastern Blue, which to me is like a hymn. It's like a bass hymnal or something. Not that I'm religious in that way, but I am religious, I guess. I'm in more of a yoga religion type of way. But that song has a certain vibe to it that is, especially the melodies, the way that came together. And that was the first melody that I overdubbed I used that white pedal, and I used stereo TC electronic chorus, and I ended up following up and doing it on the rest. But that, I just said, oh man, it plays like butter. It's just really singing. So I think that one for me too. But there are moments on all of them, I have to say. And the funny thing is, I can still listen to this record, and that's amazing, because most records by this point,
you're tired of
them, after writing for 9 months and recording and listening and mixing and listening and mastering and listening, and then listening to, when I had to make some CDs to send to radio, so I had to listen to it again to make sure that the CD sounds okay, and then over and over again. But I still, when I go to the gym, I'll put it on and I'll listen to certain sections. And so I think that's a good sign, because usually in the past I would be saturated by this point. But I lay off. I take time off and don't listen for a while. But it is time for me to think about something else. I'm ready, and I want to keep it going. I want to keep the momentum going of the creative output. So
kind of cool that like you got some brand new coming out, but you're already on the next one. So yeah.
Well, I'm thinking of that. Yes. But you like Cross Currents and Homebrew, you had said, Paul?
Homebrew is my favorite. I think Homebrew, Roll With It, and Pond Hay Train and Gulf Train, those are some of my favorites. But yeah, there's a lot of good ones on here. I enjoy it a bit.
Eric, thanks for the review of it. I was reading it again before we got together today. Thank you for that. And I just want to say, Sea of Tranquility is a great website. It's unbelievable what you guys have going here.
I mean, the website has been going on since 2001. So, and there's 24,000 reviews on there from, jazz and fusion and metal and progressive rock and classic rock and everything in between. And then the YouTube channel now is celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. So yeah, we keep busy. Wow. We keep busy, Mark. Yeah.
But it's a great for, progressive rock, jazz, fusion, everything. It's really a really great outlet. It's right up my alley, and most of the people that I know, musician wise,
That's great to hear.
It's a great thing, you guys.
Thank
have
you.
got going. And you started it in 2001?
Yeah, 2001 was the website, and before that we were a print magazine for a couple of years, and then I started up the channel here in 2014. So that's 10 years with that now. So the years are just flying by. It feels like I've been doing this for half my life, and it's almost the case.
Wow. Well, congratulations. Keep it up. It's great.
Thanks,
It's so
Mark.
needed. You know,
I
this
appreciate
reminds me of what I was saying earlier about FM radio in the in the 60s, where you could hear a lot of different things and it wasn't just one type of branding, you know. You can
Yeah.
hear it. I was looking at the variants of what you got going, and there's so much. And there shouldn't be limitations, you know. Music is music, and I guess it's just the nature of the way that humans compartmentalize things, or the marketing. It's marketing. It's really marketing, the way that radio stations have become so compartmentalized. That's all I can say.
For sure. Yeah, we kind of have an old school mentality here, I think, and it works. We have an audience that likes this sort of thing, and they like to, you know, watch me interview Mark Egan, and the next week I'll interview Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull, or I'll interview the drummer from Autopsy, a death metal band, and the next week I'm interviewing, you know, Steve Lukather or whatever, and we review, you know, all new albums by new bands, older artists, you know, classic artists. It's just what we do. So
Great. Well, keep it up. Keep up the great work. This is awesome.
thank you, Mark, and you as well. And so everybody watching, Cross Currents is the new album. Please go check it out. And before you know it, Mark will have something else for us, I'm sure, after that, maybe later this year or next year. And we look forward to that as well. And thanks for watching, everybody. This is on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're here on YouTube, all together, all the damn time. Much thanks to Mark Egan for spending some time with us here tonight. For Mark and Eric Porter, I am Pete Pardo. Good night, everybody. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Eric.